Hello, hello. Welcome to season 5 of Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. My name is Debbie Heiser, and I help entrepreneurs make a lot of money doing what they love without sacrificing what's important to them. I see way too many business people letting their businesses or their jobs run their lives versus them figuring out with real clarity about what they want their lives to look like and having their job or their business be the conduit to have that life that they absolutely love. I want to thank you so much for listening in to season 5. This season is filled with motivation, inspiration, leadership, and wisdom from some super interesting guests, and myself included. My hope is through our shared experiences, you will see a bit of yourself and move further into leading your own lit up life. If you're enjoying this podcast, please feel free to share with others and leave a rating, and a comment or two would be awesome too. Let's get going. Thanks again for being a part of our community.
Straight from the corners of my mind is where I find my sanity.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. I am excited to have Emma French visit us today, and let me explain a little bit why. Not only for those of you that are on YouTube watching, does she look fabulous with this new haircut thing she's got going on here. But Emma and I met. It's kind of a unique thing. So I like to go into how I met people and why I wanted to have you on the podcast. So Emma and I, we have a mutual friend. Well, her best friend is now living downstairs in my apartment for the winter. And I was dating her father, and I went to her college graduation. And as those things progress, right, when you don't know anyone, and I was sitting outside. So I was sitting outside on the deck and just kind of observing and, talking to people, introducing myself. And Emma came and sat down and we started talking. And immediately, I had this connection that I'm like, I want to know her better. Right. And we sat out there, I don't know, probably for 3 hours, give or take. And then our friend Devin joined it. Right. But we were sitting there and having this flowing conversation. I got up a couple times, you got up a couple times, but it was we constantly came back to these 2 chairs on the back deck. And Emma, you just impressed me. And so those of you that are listening and watching, the reason I wanted to have Emma on here is Emma is young. You don't have to share how old you are, but young, but yet, you have some clarity about what you want and you're going after it. And it doesn't feel like a graspy kind of going after it, but more so this thoughtful, and maybe you just, I don't know if this is really, but very thoughtful, mindful approach to going forward in what you want. And I know you're getting your PhD right now. So I'm going to have you describe who you are, what you are doing in the world, and how you are hoping to show up in the future in this world. So go for it. Introduce yourself, Miss Emma.
Absolutely. Hello, my name is Emma French. I am currently in Colorado. However, I am from Idaho. I'm kind of going off of how Debbie and I met. And currently I am in my PhD for counseling psychology to be a psychologist. And I also am a business owner. I have my own private practice for psychological services, which is basically just counseling. And then I also do some industrial and organizational consulting that takes more of a counseling perspective for business owners. And so I do have this sort of mindful intention with what I would like to do in this world, the things that I want to achieve. And as Debbie said, I am pretty young. And so that's an interesting feeling for me because I get that feedback from people around me that have some more life experience, that I do have this sort of clarity. And I'm excited to talk a little bit more about how that's come to be for me and sort of how I embody that.
So let's dig into that, Emma. When did the realization hit you that this is my life's work? This is where I want to head in the head, right? In the mind. How, what intrigued you? What was that thing that sent you in that trajectory?
Yeah. So I got 2 bachelor's degrees from the University of Idaho, one being in philosophy and the other being in psychology. And I think getting those 2 together was one of the most instrumental things for me that really led me to the passion of working with people, and of counseling, which a lot of people kind of are asked about counseling and they have their own experiences, but they're like, why do you like counseling? And it's basically because philosophy, right? I get to sit around all day and I get to talk about the mind and I get to talk about people's experiences with that. And then psychology, right, is that actual study of the mind. And so I kind of have that like backdoor entrance, that like behind the scenes look, of what we know about the brain and what we know about human experience. And so for me, when I was in my undergrad like that, I was like, whoa, I feel so on fire for philosophy. However, philosophy is like this cycle where you go to school, you get a PhD, and then you teach it. And that is like all that happens in philosophy. And I was just, I was turned off by that because I thought there doesn't feel like there's a ton of opportunity. And I realized that I was in that time in my life, I was sort of coming into this phase where I found who I was. I kind of felt like I was in a shell before that. And I said, I want somewhere where I can like find my own niche and figure out how I can contribute, how I can feel excited every day when I wake up. And so I was like, I think I'm gonna have to go counseling to create a sort of space for that I want. And that's what continued to kind of lead me down the businessy route of being like, I think I can create something that is original from me that can help people.
Fantastic. And so you grew up in Moscow, right?
I did, yes.
Yeah. And then let's like, okay, I'm going to brag on you just a bit and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you had a double major and you did it in less time than people normally get one major.
Yes, I did 2 bachelor's degrees in 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's impressive.
Yeah.
And so like, this is that like focus that I see that you have, right? And because I'm a big believer in that desire is causative, right? And we create a chain of causative actions that then create the effect that we want. And so you're a perfect example, which is part of what I love and I geek out about, right? In the younger generation, and I say younger makes me feel old, but like in the younger generation that has this clarity and says, I'm going to go forward and create this life that I want. So what did you do after your undergraduate degree?
I went to Idaho State University for my master's in counseling, and that was another 2-year degree before finally coming down to Colorado and starting my PhD this past fall.
Yeah. And how are you liking Colorado?
I love Colorado so far. I definitely, there's a very soft place for Idaho in my heart. I love it. And I think very similar to what you're talking about with like a younger generation that maybe grows up in smaller places, there's this sort of like craving for something that's like maybe a little bit bigger, somewhere where you can go and no one knows you and you can show up there and just say, this is who I want to be. And I can do that, because I think it kind of lets go of any sort of opinions or any sort of like messages that have been holding you back. And that's an experience that I really capitalize on when I sort of like share about myself, because I definitely felt like once I came to a completely brand new place, I was like, this is a version, I have this version in my head of who I want to be. And I said, let's do it. Like, what is holding me back from doing it? I can absolutely do that.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, like we get on these paths where we know we can absolutely do it, but then my assumption is that you're like a lot of people where all of a sudden then we hit this roadblock and we hit, I call them big boulders, right? And water hits a boulder and it either learns to go up and over it or around it, you know, and that's how I envision you, right? Like as water, you're going around, like this obstacle's there, but you figure out how to do that. Can you think about in that journey that you're talking about, and even up until this point in time, potentially a couple of big boulders that were in your way and made you stop and take pause for a minute, and then what you did to overcome that obstacle?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest boulders was one that like I potentially put there myself. And it was the self-doubt of like, you like are not good enough to get into a master's or a PhD program. You can't do it. Like they won't pick you. They don't like you very much, right? Like all of these sort of like in counseling, we call it narrative, right? The narrative around this big message of like, you can't do it. And that's really hard to overcome. Like there's no good solution that will like fix everyone's self-doubt in that way. But to, like you're saying, to overcome it, I think there's an acceptance in knowing that like I am who I am. And if I can go out into the world and if I can show these professors, these committees, if I can show everyone that like this is my true authentic self, then even if I didn't get into those, even if the outcome didn't work out the way I wanted, I still know that I put myself out there 100% in the way that I intended to. And I think that decreased my anxiety, which in turn helped that process. But really, after I got in, I kind of looked back and I was just like, you put yourself through the ringer so hard for almost no reason, because you really did try your hardest, and you were able to sort of overcome that over a period of time. So not to say that those things are necessarily easy. However, it's absolutely possible when I think when you start to have that acceptance, and you start to be like compassionate to yourself of like, this is something I can do. Those are the really two key pieces that I feel like have helped me in almost like nearly every obstacle sort of since then that I've been able to overcome.
So that's really cool. And you talk about, excuse me, you talk about being your authentic self. What does it mean to you, Emma, to like, if you were to say, Debbie, show up as your authentic self, like, how would I define that? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. I think for me, the very first thing that comes to mind is I used to sort of like not laugh at things that were funny, or I like used to like hold back like jokes, or just like I used to really filter what I said, right? And there's definitely still a need for a filter in different places that you're at, different environments. However, I think it's about being able to be confident in what you're saying, right? I'm like, if something is funny, I want to laugh at that, right? I want to be able to put my shoes on in the morning and be like, I love these shoes and they look damn good on me, right?
Yeah.
And go out into the world and feel comfortable in the way that I look, in the way that I talk, in the way that I speak. And I feel like that was a big shift for me into like feeling like my authentic self. And for me also, it is about being able to professionally still be Emma French. When I go out with my friends for dinner, being Emma French. When I'm with my family, my partner, when I'm just meeting someone for the first time at a networking event, at a conference, right? I want to be able to feel comfortable in who I am. And granted, that can be hard to get to. However, for me, it is about that piece of like giving yourself compassion that you are who you are. And that matters. That matters to you and that matters to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so refreshing to hear you say that as a young person. And I don't mean that like a young person as like a detriment. I mean, young person as far as like, you still have a whole lot of life ahead of you, hopefully, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And
I hope.
you've had a lot of life experience. And I look at you, and maybe you've heard this before, that like, I feel like there's this old soul in you. And so when you think about people in your life, can you think of a few people in your life that were instrumental in helping you believe in yourself and realize what it meant and that it was safe to be your authentic self?
Yeah, I absolutely can. And for me, that's my family. So like shout out to them. My close friends, including the bestie that lives in your basement right now. And
Okay, wait, that sounds so funny. Bestie that lives in my basement, right?
Yeah, doesn't it?
So you're not a troll, Adriana.
Yeah, I'm
My
like
basement is
she might
really
even
nice.
yeah, she might be down there right now, not even knowing, but she is the bestie. um and like my counselors were really big for me. There was one in particular, a psychologist I had in high school, who kind of like looked at me and was like, why are you having this anxiety and like struggling with who you are? And he goes, you know who you are, and you're afraid to like show that to the world. And I mean, that was like one of the most instrumental things I think in all of my career that helped me personally, obviously, but also professionally, to sort of be like, there are people who see me for me. And I think that that's really important in your life, no matter who that is, right? And another like sort of shameful plug I give in counseling is mindfulness, right? Like I think that even the lady that checks you out at the grocery store or the guy at the bank, right, says, "Oh, I like your earrings," or "Your hair looks good today," right? Those are like data points, right? That is evidence that says you are showing up in the world and someone else is noticing that, right? Even if it's in the form of a compliment.
Yeah. And Emma, it makes me think too, I don't know how much you know of the Gottman
Mhm.
Institute. You probably do, being in counseling,
Yes.
but like it's a bid for connection,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? Even if it's more of a superficial connection or a deep
Mhm.
connection, but by saying, "Oh, I love your hair, I love that necklace," or whatever it
Mhm.
is,
Mhm.
and then you have those people that you feel safer with, that you can dig
Mhm.
even further. That's
Yeah.
not the superficial bids for
Mhm.
connection. So when you think about that, like
Mhm.
if you were talking to someone, and I'm going to
Mhm.
totally take this in a different realm, I hope you don't mind,
Sure.
and
Absolutely.
think about being our authentic self in
Mhm.
connection,
Mhm.
what would you, like somebody that's struggling right now? You talked
Mhm.
about being anxious back when you were in
Mhm.
high school,
Mhm.
and we see a lot of people right now coming off of global like chaos
Yeah.
and being anxious and a lot of the things happening in the world. When you think about that, what's some words of wisdom you would give to people that are struggling with showing up and being who they are and being anxious about what's
Mhm.
taking place in the world?
Mhm. Yeah, I have 2 big things that are coming
Okay.
to mind for me. The first, is just try one thing different, right?
Mm,
Just try one thing different a day. Um, Try one thing different with one relationship, right? One habit that you're doing, and notice what happens, right? That's what I tell people in counseling and in my life, is because sometimes I feel like we start to struggle, and when we struggle, we just kind of like put on our negative glasses and we're like, that's wrong and that's wrong and that's wrong and that's wrong, and it's so difficult to like take those negative glasses off. But if I said try something different and I hand you positive glasses and you put them on, then you can be like, wait, I notice that I got up 15 minutes earlier and I felt like I had a little bit more energy today, right? Or I made my coffee a little bit different because I'm trying to cut out sugar and I felt better about it. Those small changes, I think, are things that lead to bigger changes, right?
yeah.
And so, in terms of more of like connection and a relationship, right? What I tell a lot of clients that experience some depression or are just like having trouble feeling connected to other people is, when you are going to the gas station or the grocery store or wherever you're running your errands, right? And you see another person, instead of it just being like, oh, hey, like, how are you, right? Be like, hey, how are you today, right? And like say it with
Yeah.
your mouth, say it with your eyes, say it with your heart. Asking them how they are. And more often than not, if that other person is also in that moment with you, they're going to connect to that and notice that, because these days, like, we don't necessarily connect in those superficial relationships, and the same can be done in your personal relationships, right? Being a couples and family counselor, I highly encourage those systems of clients to try something that's novel, of like, tell me one thing you learned today, right? That's kind of like a novel thing. Like, who comes home at night and, you're like trying to make dinner and watching TV and you're like, tell me one thing you learned. And so it's trying these really small, novel things that, if for me and what I've seen, can start to lead to big change, right? Especially in terms of
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah, Emma, it's funny when you said that. I kind of was giggling because my thing always used to be when we would come home and my son would come home from school, like, don't ask, oh, how was school today? Because you always get the, oh, it was fine, right?
Yep.
Instead, it was, what was the best thing that happened to you today? And then what happened is over the course of time, you start to look for those best things that
Yes.
happened, or look for those learning moments that you have. And then it becomes, you kind of rewire your mind, right? Because you're looking for those things versus stepping back and letting them just fly by, which in my opinion, takes you out of the anxiety and depression.
It
Right.
absolutely does. And we, not to interrupt you, but we know that we know that scientifically and psychologically that your brain literally will rewrite the neurological connections to each other from this like negative sort of schema is what we call it, to something that's positive. And then you have the positive glasses on, and I think life becomes a lot more enjoyable long term.
Absolutely. And Emma, I'm going to be authentic here for a second and share with our listeners and those of you viewing on YouTube. One of the things that I had pointed out to me actually last October was in a particular relationship that I have, and how I tend to put on, I'm going to take my glasses off for a moment. I tend to put on these lenses of disappointment, and I'm going to take them back off and put on the lens of like, wow type of thing. Because what I found is through messaging, and it's funny how, and you see this, I'm sure, in what you do, like how they're layers. Like, I don't think I ever get over, like I geek out on neuroscience, and I know you do too. I don't think we ever get over these subconscious messages that come in that create a belief, but we can change the belief. And so they become layers though. And how like interesting how thinking I'd let go of these lenses of disappointment, but then I put them on for a particular relationship. And until someone made me aware to say, why would you want to hang out with someone that constantly is looking for disappointment? Like that you're going to be hurt by them or be disappointed in them. And I was like, whoa, right? Like, holy cow. And how then like physically even thinking about putting on lenses of how am I wowed by this person? And it completely changed the relationship. I'm talking about my son, completely changed the relationship with him. And that's what I hear you saying is like, how can you even as a counselor help people to see those things differently so that then it rewires their brain differently? And so that leads me to another question, because I've been like holding this one. I don't want to forget it. What do you geek out on?
What do I geek out on? That's a good question. Like, there's a lot, honestly. Currently, my like geek out is probably attachment. And I like to look at attachment right now from like the biological perspective. Because there's this like little ball of everything we know about the brain biologically, and then there's like this giant ball right here of everything we don't, right? And so it's so interesting when we're talking about this type of like neurological research, that it's like we don't know a whole lot. And so I'm just like trying to geek out on that. The term we've been using is like intergenerational trauma, and how the trauma, it trickles down right through our bodies, and biologically, and then also just through how we're raised. Like we pick up patterns from our parents. And so that's like been my reading topic for the past couple months.
Oh, fun. And a book I love to plug, but it's really dense, and I'm sure you've read it, is The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah, great
it's
book.
Super dense. So those of you listening, just realize it's going to take you at least 6 months to get through it. But such a good book, right? And talks about that and how the body tells us things. Like disease is really dis-ease, right? Like, and it's so funny, Emma, I'm sure you found this too. Like I remember, this isn't necessarily the best shout out for my ex-husband, but like I remember like being sick and always feeling like certain things in my body. And the minute we got divorced, and it was like, and as I healed myself internally from an emotional and psychological perspective, my physical body got better. And in all honesty, I look at pictures today. Now, those of you on YouTube, be nice. I look at pictures today and think I look younger than I did 15 years ago. because of that whole, like, as you're talking, the body and how that hangs on to things. And I mean, even Oprah says the issues are in the tissues, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's awesome. And okay, let me ask you too. So
Yeah.
I'm laughing at myself, and those of you listening are laughing, but geek out might be an old 80s term. What's the new term to say?
Geek out. I don't know. I am such an academic that I feel so disconnected from Gen Z right now. Oh my goodness. I think geek out is still, or nerd out. Like
Nerd
I
out?
hear nerd out a lot. Yeah, I think they're the same.
Okay, awesome. So couple last questions before we wrap this up.
Sure.
Best last book that you've read?
Best last book that I read. Oh, for me, it's called My Grandmother's Hands. Super good. I will give a little bit of a warning. It's political in terms of police like violence, but it comes at it from a counseling perspective in how can we fix it. So it's so hopeful. I love it. And it gives you exercises to like do with your body. And it's about healing trauma in the body for all races, all diversity, everyone. So
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. I'm gonna have to look that one up. Okay, what do you love to do in your free time? Top 3 things.
top 3 things. In the winter, I snowboard, which is my favorite. In the summer, I'm a big hiker, excited to do the 14ers down here in Colorado that everyone
Yeah.
talks about. And then I also play the cello, which I enjoy.
I
Lots.
think I knew that. I think we talked about that.
Yeah,
I love the cello. It's one of my favorite instruments.
it's beautiful. And I just started learning it within the past 2 years. And so it's never too late to learn. I told myself it was, but here I am, a cello player.
There you go. I love that. I love that. Okay, Miss Emma, if somebody wants to follow you, they want to get in touch with you, where should we send them?
Yeah. My LinkedIn is a great place to start, and it has links to my website, my Instagram, everything like that, emails. And then my Instagram would be another place. My business name is called Ascendant Psychological Services. And so that Instagram handle is just Ascendant Psych Services.
Okay. And let's make sure that if Sarah doesn't have that info, that she has that. We'll put that in the show notes for people.
Perfect.
And so, Emma, thank you so much for your time. I know you're busy. You have a lot on your plate right now. How's it looking from your PhD? When do you start the whole dissertation process?
Yeah, I actually am just like getting involved in that process right now. My coursework has almost wrapped up. And so I have about 3 more years of dissertation and internship.
Nice.
Yes.
I can't wait to see the final product.
Yeah.
So with that, it is a wrap. And thank you so much for everyone for listening. If you'd like to have a conversation with me about clarity and how you can lead your lit up life, please go out to my website found in the show notes and set up a clarity call. And with that, folks, it's a wrap. Have a great week. And thank you again, Miss Emma.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. The song Ride is co-written and sung by Miss Jackie Wilson and her collaborators Tyler Banks, David DJ Lee, and Chris Renee. And a huge shout out to them for allowing us to use this perfect song. Everyone have a fabulous week, and I'll talk to you next week.